Hello, guys. It's Mr. Cole. Continuing on today about learning about fiscal policy. So, just a quick recap from yesterday. Fiscal policy is the government's use of taxes and spending. So, basically, their programs and how much money they take in to affect the economy. And we talked about how they would either be expansionary policy, which is where you're trying to increase the economic output, you're trying to grow the economy, or times of contractionary policy where you're trying to decrease it. Now, our general understanding of fiscal policy today is a lot different than what it used to be. Okay, traditionally, the kind of golden age of economics, the classical economics, what we call it, of Adam Smith and David Ricardo and all those guys we learned about in the third quarter, they all preached no government intervention at all in the economy. Right? Adam Smith talked about the idea of an invisible hand. Let the invisible hand sort out the economy on its own, right? And that the government should do little with it, right? We've referred to this as a laissez-faire attitude towards the economy, where the government does not step in and try and fix things. Now, the general reason why was because, based on the theory of the invisible hand, that individual people acting in their own self-interest in the long run would solve the issue that we had, right? So, for example, we talked about if there was a lack of bread in the country, okay? The government could order that more bread gets made, right? But the government's not real good at doing that, right? And organizing all that. Or you could just let there be a shortage of bread, and eventually bread prices get so high that people decide to start making more bread. And that was the general theory that people had run about times when the economy is doing poorly, that you should just sit back and do nothing. And from about 1800 to the early 1920s, that was the strategy that governments used. If the economy's not doing well, let it ride itself out in the long run. Eventually, prices would get so low that the economy would turn around again. However, this changes in the 1930s, and it changes due to the Great Depression. The Great Depression and the rash of bank failures, the sustained incredibly high levels of unemployment, this just sheer suffering that took place, kind of woke up economists to the fact that maybe we need to adjust this, that maybe the invisible hand has failed, right? What do you do when it's in your best self-interest to, not run a business? Because the Great Depression was so bad, who's going to start a business during the Great Depression? Right? Who's going to hire somebody during the Great Depression? So we were stuck in this downward cycle that we could not get out of. Somebody had to turn the cycle around. And the Great Depression really starts to change this idea of laissez-faire. And at the same time, a British economist by the name of John Maynard Keynes comes around and proposes a new way to address economic problems. Instead of sitting around and letting the economy recover itself in the long run, John Maynard Keynes is most famously for replying to that statement, well, in the long run, we are all dead. And his point being that, yes, eventually the economy is going to recover on its own, but isn't the job of the government to maintain the well-being of the people? So as a result, when the economy is going bad, the well-being of the people is going badly, and so as a result, government's job is to step in. And he proposes today what we call a demand-side fiscal policy. The idea that the government should step in and fix the economy by stimulating demand, get people buying things again. Today, we refer to this as Keynesian Economics. It's an idea based, of course, on John Maynard Keynes. It was an idea that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, our president during the Great Depression, read very closely John Maynard Keynes' theories and decided to implement Keynesian economics. Okay, by stimulating demand, President Roosevelt used the power of the federal government to begin a series of programs called the New Deal, trying to get people to work through the government, planting trees, building roads, building hospitals, building highways, trying to get people a paycheck, because when people get a paycheck, you spend it, and it starts the spiral going upwards. There's a picture of Keynes, by the way. Probably the most important economist since Adam Smith in terms of a fundamental change in the way that we view the economic world. Keynes argued that it was better for the government to spend money and take on debt if they were doing it to stabilize the economy. Okay, the general theory of government had been that government was supposed to run as a normal household. A normal household, you cannot spend more than you take in. Keynes argues that the government is not a normal household, right? A normal household doesn't bring in $4 trillion a year. So the government is able to take on debt, to take on deficit, to borrow money if it's being used to stabilize the economy. Balancing the budget should not be important in the ideas of Keynesian economics. The idea is for government to have an active role in the economy. So during an economic downturn, this is a really big point right here, the government should increase their spending and decrease their taxes. Okay, now think about that for a second. Increased spending during the Great Depression, we built hospitals, roads, planted millions of trees. Those were all paid for by the government. At the same time, though, all that money you're spending, you're supposed to actually cut your taxes. Okay? The idea is by cutting taxes, people have more money. When people have more money, they buy more things, and that starts driving the economy again. Now, you may notice, though, if the government increases its spending by trillions of dollars and decreases its taxes, that is going to lead to an enormous deficit. And Keynes is okay with that. He says during times of recession, the government should be the one falling into debt to make sure that the general population does not. Okay? We see this today, little current events. This is being played out currently in our Congress and our president's fiscal policy. President Trump in Congress's $2 trillion economic stimulus is a great example of Keynesian economics. Every American getting a $1,200 check, right? That's the government trying to drive demand. They're giving you money as a consumer, trying to drive your demand up. Okay? And I'll show you here. So the kind of economic justification of it, as you get that $1,200 check, or as you get that job planting trees during the Great Depression, that drives demand to the right. And when it drives demand to the right, in turn, what you get is a growth in GDP, right? People start making more money, they start spending more money, things get made, more people get hired, and it gets the economy rolling again, okay? Now with this, though, Keynes is not always arguing for massive government spending. In fact, he says during good times, okay, when the economy is doing well and inflation starts to happen because demand is too high, then it's the government's role to decrease their spending and to start raising taxes. This is not the fun part of Keynesian economics, right? Nobody likes this part of it. When the economy is doing well, Keynes argues that's when you should worry about balancing the budget, right? Raise your taxes, cut your programs, right? Quit having people plant trees, make individuals plant trees, quit, building hospitals, make private companies do that, right? And in turn, you're going to start to see the economy go down some, right? So I should have left this up. So as the price gets too high, he says we actually need to shift demand down again. We need to control inflation and drive it down to get prices to go down, okay? With this, demand-side policies. Demand-side policies in Keynesian economics becomes kind of the economic play for governments all the way through the 1980s. So for about a 50-year run, this was the move that governments used. Today, it is still widely popular today. Like I said, President Trump used it. President Obama used it quite a bit during the 2008-2009 recession, also using stimulus checks and things like that. So it's still very much so around today. Now, the problem with it is that you can argue that it has led to government probably overdoing it a little bit too much with its spending because government never likes to cut the programs once the recession's over, right? When the recession's over, everybody's like, oh, we kind of like that program. Let's keep that. And so that's one of the kind of challenging things that goes along with it. Along with that, of course, Keynes is arguing during good times, you're supposed to raise taxes. Well, we've talked about how nobody likes doing that. And then the other big problem is this. The demand side policies do not work during times of what we call stagflation. We're going to go over that a little bit more tomorrow, but stagflation, I should have put it in your notes here, is times of falling GDP and rising inflation. At the time, it was theorized that that was impossible, okay? During the 1970s and what we'll see tomorrow, you will see that it is very possible that it can happen. And we will get into that more later on the next one tomorrow. So with that, that is John Maynard Keynes and Keynesian economics. also called demand side economics, where we're trying to stimulate the economy by getting more money in people's hands, and in turn, demand shifts right, which causes output to go up and prices to go up. All right, thank you guys. See y'all.